Hello everybody, in this tutorial I'm going to explain to you the different types of statements that you have in C++. So let's dive right into it. The first type of statement that you have is called an if statement. Basically in here you specify something, so I've created a little variable called I, and let's say I is an integer, and only if the value of I is less than 5 we're going to do stuff. Then we have an else statement, so let's say that we have this if statement and I was 7, so it was not less than 5. Then the else statement will be called if we specified that, so then it will do this stuff. But let's say we also want to check then if I is less than 7, because the special case is if I is less than 7, but not is bigger than 5 but less than 7. Then we can call an else if statement, and then we can specify some other values. So right now I set else if I is bigger or equal than 5. I'm gonna talk about these different ways to check too. Then we do stuff. Then we also have a for loop. So basically we create some sort of value. So now I've created another integer. I shouldn't call this I, maybe I should call this j. And this basically, it does whatever you specified in here, how many times you specified it should do it. So basically j starts at 0, and then every time that this loop is finished, j will be incremented by 1. So it will do stuff 5 times. And then we also have a while loop, and basically while this statement is true, it will do stuff. But if this statement is not true, then it will not do this stuff. Then we also have a do while loop, and basically what it is exactly a while loop, but it's a little bit different because it will first run the code and then check if it should continue. Unlike the while loop, it will first check if it is true and then do the stuff. So basically it's the reversed order. It will first do the stuff and then check if it should continue, instead of first check if it should continue and then do the stuff. And then we also have a switch statement. What a switch statement basically is, you should give it a value. So in this case an integer I, and then you have different cases. So in this case, if I is equal to 5, then it will do stuff and then stop doing stuff and continue with the rest of the code. That was a really quick explanation of all different types that you have. So let's now put them in code. So let's go to Visual Studio and let's create a new project. So new project. I'm gonna call it this tutorial 2, and make sure that it's a Win32 console application. That's really important. Press OK. Hit next. Make sure that's an empty project, also really important. Hit finish. Okay, now that the project is created, we need to create our main file. So on source, create a new file, a CPP file called main. So one thing that we need to include are the includes that we did last time. So once again, what an include is an hashtag include or pound include. Then either smaller than, bigger than, or double quotation marks, depending on what type of file you want to include. So that we smaller than, bigger than, and then we type in iostream, and we do hashtag include string. Then we specify our main loop again, so int main. Don't worry. Okay, now that we've created our main file, we want to do 2 includes that we also did last episode. So we want to do a pound include or hashtag include, either smaller than or bigger than, or double quotation marks. Then depending on what type of include we want. Right now we want something that's external of the project, so we'll use a smaller than, bigger than. Then we type iostream, and then we also do a hashtag or pound include string. Oh, not stack, string, because we also want to use strings in this example for printing stuff out to the console. Okay, so let's now create our main loop, a main function. So that's, we need to specify the return value first. So in this case an integer, then the name, which is main, and then it doesn't take any parameters. Don't you worry, next episode we're going to talk all about functions, and I'm going to explain to you exactly what to do and how to make them, and what you can pass into it and all. So I'm basically just going to be a full explanation about how functions work. But now first you want to start with, what was the first one? An if statement. We want to start with an if statement. So let's first create a value. So let's create an integer, specified with int, call it my value, and let's give it a value of 4. Then we can do an if statement. So if my value, now we have different types of checks that we can do. So I'm going to specify them here in comments. You create a comment in Visual Studio with C++ using double / I think it's called. Then it will be green, so you know that it's a comment. By the way, if my colors are a little bit different than you, that's true because I modified my colors to be a little bit more explanatory to me. So don't worry if it's different, it's just fine. So we have smaller than. Basically what a smaller than is, it is if value is less than. So we have, let's say we have a value x first, after that a value y. So if x is less than y, then it will be true. Then and then we also have bigger than. So if x is bigger than y, if value is bigger than, then it will return true. So only if x is bigger than y. So in this case, if x was 4 and y was 7, then it will return false. And also, if x is 7 and y is 7, it will return false because they're exactly the same. X is not bigger. That's the next thing that we're going to do. Oh. X is equal to y. Yes, it's not just a single is, since that would set x to y. It's a double is that would check if it's equal to. If value is equal, then. So only if x is equal to y, then it will return true. So it will do the statement. Then we also can combine these different things. So x is smaller than or equal. So both values are true. It can be either smaller than or equal to y. If value is equal or less than, and then we can do the same for bigger than. So this will be true if let's say the x is bigger than or equal to y. That means that it will return true if x and y are both 7, for instance, and x and y, like x is 8 and y is 7, is equal or bigger than. That are the different types of modifiers that you have. So now we can do my value is bigger than, let's say 5. So only if my value is bigger than 5, oh, let's do in this case 3, then it will enter the statement. By the way, we use the curly braces to specify different scopes, and things that you created in a scope are only accessible in that scope or lower scope. So if I create a value called an integer called my second value and set it equal to something, then I won't be able to access my second value out here because it's already out of scope, because the scope ends here. After this, everything that's inside of the scope does not exist anymore, except if you specified it outside of that scope. So as you can see, we can still access my value. That's because we created in this scope. And in here we can also access my value because it's created in a higher scope. But we cannot access my second value out here. Okay, so if my value is bigger than 3, then we do an stdc out, but we're going to specify using namespace std. Remember that name from last episode? That's the namespace that's globally used for standard things. So what we do now is we make it so that we can just access that namespace without writing the namespace every time. So now we can do a console out, cout, we push in my value was bigger than 3. And then we push in an end line. So it will give us an enter. And let's specify up here a cout testing if my value is bigger than 3. And then another end line. So now if you run this program with Ctrl F5, remember Ctrl F5? Because otherwise it will just run a program and instantly close it at the end. So now you can see that it will say testing if my value is bigger than 3, and then my value was bigger than 3. So that's great. So let's now do the second thing, an else statement. So we simply just type in else and then do the brackets. So let's do an else, cout my value was less than 3, and then an end line. So now if we change either the value of my value or the thing that we're checking against, it will change the way that the statement works. So now if I say my value is equal to 1 and we run the program again, it will say my value was less than 3 because, yeah, my value is 1 and not 3. So now let's add the third statement, an else if statement. So let's do that in between here, since an else if statement always needs to be after an if statement. It can't be after an else statement, it needs to be after an if statement. Else if my value is equal to 3. Remember the is equal to? That's a double is, not a single is. It's a fault. That's a fault that I've made a lot of times, and it will give no error because it's just valid. You just set my value to 3, but that means that it will always return true because you just set the value to 3. That's legit. It works, and then it would just always do whatever you want it to do, only when the value is equal to something. So that's something really important. Don't forget this is a double is. So let's cout now. Console out. It stands for console out if you forgot. My value is equal to 3. And then an end line, because otherwise you will not have an enter at the end. So now if you set my value to 3 and run the program again, it will say my value is equal to 3. And if we change it to something else, so let's say 2 again, so it's not going to be in this if statement, and it's not going to be in the else if statement. If we now run it, you will see that it will still call this function, this else statement. It will still say my value was less than 3. Oh, I misspelled that, by the way. But what we can do is we can chain else if statements. So I can type another else if statement, and then this we can check, for instance, if my value is equal to 2. And if my value is equal to 2, cout my value is equal to 2. Okay. End line. And if we our value is right now equal to 2, but what you will see right now is that it will call that function. So basically what we can do is we can chain a lot of different statements, but there's an easy way to do that. If we want to check each number individually, what we can do is use a switch statement. What a switch statement is you type in switch, then the rounded braces, in that you type the value that you want to check, so in this case my value, and then you use the curly braces to specify, okay, this is the scope in which you're going to check things. Like here I'm going to specify all my different values that I want to check against. So let's, for instance, say let's add a case. A case is something that you want to check against. So we had a case called 2, and then we use a double dots to specify, now I opened it, this is the case, and in here we can type whatever we want. So cout my value was 2, and then an end line. We can do this for, and then we need to specify a break. It's really important, otherwise it will continue the code. Since what you can do is, say for instance you want both 1 and 2 to call exactly, to do exactly the same, instead of copying the code. So instead of like having to copy, in this case the cout, you can just type in case 1. So now both case 1 and case 2 will call the cout my value was 2. So if we changed my value to 1 right now, what you will see, it will say my value was 2. Right here, my value was 2, because we did not specify a break. But if I would now type a break here, and I would run it again, then you will say, hey, it doesn't say it anymore. And what if we want something else? Like, do we have to specify it for every single number if we only want to have 2 special cases? So we now have my value was equal to 1 and my value was equal to 2, but what if we I just wanted to say with everything else my value is not equal to 1 or 2? What then? Then we can use a default. So we just type in default and then the double dots, and then we end with the break, of course, otherwise it will run the code. I'll continue running the code, and that's not what we want. We want to stop after we've done what we need to do. And now we can type cout my value was not equal to 1 or 2, then an end line. So basically what this will do is it will call this default function whenever none of these cases are met. So if my value is not equal to 1 and not equal to 2, you can have up to as many as you want. You can have up to like 1,000 different cases if you want to. But when it's not equal to one of the 1,000 different cases, it will call a default statement. So let's say my value is equal to 0, and we run this code, then it will say my value was not equal to 1 or 2. That's true. Okay, next thing. So I've already done the switch statement because it felt like a good moment. Okay, so the next thing is a for loop. Let's do a for loop. So the way that you declare a for loop is for, and then you use the rounded braces, and then you type some sort of value. So let's just use an int. Let's give it a name. So let's call it index, and such a useful a normal name to call it. You either call it index or I. I is short for index. You set it equal to a starting value, so let's say 0, and then you specify do this while this is true. So this is basically a while loop, a different version of a while loop. I will show you exactly the same that you can do the same thing with a while loop in just a second. So now you will specify the statement just like we do in an if statement. So while I is less than, let's say, 5, then we end that part, and then we do I++, since we want to increment I by 1. The I++, you can, by the way, use ++ on every single, that's from the last tutorial, every single different variable. The only thing that in this case, so it's equal to, it's the same as doing I is equal to I plus 1 or I plus equals 1. What you can do with counting in C++ is you can specify whatever you want to add or remove or divide by before an is equal to. So what we can do is I divide equals 1, so that means that this is exactly the same as doing I is equal to I divided by 1, or plus equals 1 is equal is the same as I is equal to I plus 1. So what we do is we do I plus plus, since that's the easiest way to do it. Then we use the curly braces, and then in here we're gonna, let's say, see out the current index is, and then we're gonna push the index in, so we're gonna push an I, and then we're also gonna push in an end line. You can push as many different things into a console out as you want. So what this code will do is it will, let's move it over. It will run this program, will do whatever is between the brackets while I is less than 5. But as you can see, it stops at 4. That's because we specified I is less than 5 and not I is less or equal than 5. So if we do that, and we first close it, and then we run it again, now you will see that will also include the 5. So current index is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, the next thing is a while loop. So a while loop is a thing that you shouldn't use if you don't have to. Only use it when you have to. If you can use a for loop or if statements, a switch, whatever, try to not use while loops unless you really need to, for instance for a game loop. So let's say while, let's make something that looks like a for loop, because otherwise it's never gonna exit. So we're gonna create an integer called index. We set it equal to 0, and while index is less than 10, do whatever's in between the next curly braces, so whatever is in this scope. Then the first thing that we're going to specify, or actually the last thing that we're going to specify in this while loop, but we're going to type it first, is index plus plus. So we'll increment index by 1, and we're also going to do the see out. My current index is an index, but let's add just an end line here, just so we know that we started the while loop and we're not in the for loop anymore. So we're just going to do a see out, console out, and then an end line. Yes, you can just do that. You don't have to specify any type of string or integer or float, whatever. You can just do see out end line. So what this will do, it will call this function, it will do whatever's in between the curly braces while index is less than 10 in this case. So we'll basically do it 9 times, because index will increment every time, and after 9 times index is not less than 10 anymore. But we could also do while true. This is a really bad statement that you should never do, and you shouldn't run this on your computer right now at home while you're testing it, because what this will do is it's an infinite loop. Like, as you can see, it never stops. It constantly keeps incrementing the current index and printing that out. Eventually this will break because you're out of values. So let's just exit it right now. Okay, let's revert to the previous thing that we had. So index is less than 10, and let's now do a while loop. So we're gonna move this while down here. So we first have the scope, and then we have the while, and now we only have to specify do in front of it. So this means that it will do whatever's inside of this scope while index is less than 10, and now we do need to specify a semicolon at the end. If it moves it, by the way, it doesn't matter, it's fine. So now it will first do this whatever's in the scope, and then check whether it's true. So we should see something funny right now. Oh no, actually it doesn't. Well, at least this is also a valid way to specify a different loop, a different while loop. This is an old way to do it. I would just use while and then the scope, but you can also do it this way if you really want to. I'm going to get the switch statement. So we're basically through it all. So these are the different types of statements that we have. Let's have a little recap. We have an if statement that will only run whenever a certain criteria is met. Then we have an else if statement that will also only run when a certain criteria is met. And then we have an else statement, and that will run whenever some criteria isn't met, or a lot of different criteria, because you have a lot of different else-if statements, aren't met. And then we have a switch, and this is basically the same as a chain of if-else-if statements, and an else. So this, we could basically make a switch out of that, but we have to specify each individual number. In this case, we can do my value is bigger than 1. Then I will give like squiggly lines underneath the bigger than. We can only do with individual numbers. And then we have a for loop. For loop will basically have a value in the beginning that will constantly be incremented. It's basically a while loop. Like, this is the same as a for loop, but a for loop is a nicer way of writing it, since now you need to create a different variable, and like, it's basically gonna be specified on at least 2 lines, and it's not as clear as this, since also this index will be always accessible in the main scope, like in the same scope as my value is accessible. While this I can't access this I out here. I doesn't exist, but I does exist in here. So what I does is, it's basically a while loop, and it also has the value that you specify to use only inside of the loop that you're working in. So basically only inside of the for loop. And you have a while loop, and it's, yeah, basically do all this code while something while some criteria aren't met. Oh, and one thing that's also really handy to know is we can have a boolean. So let's do it underneath here. So let's have a boolean called yeah, my bool for now, and set it equal to true. There's one extra case that I haven't done in here, but I also want to learn to you guys. And let's have an if statement. So if my bool, then console out my bool was true, and then end line. Like, now I think that you might now be wondering, like, why did you not specify anything after it? Like, why doesn't it have to be equal to something? If you don't specify anything, at least with bools, like with integers, is a little bit different. You should also always specify something. But with booleans, if you don't specify anything, then it will run if it's true. And if you put an exclamation mark in front of it, then it will give you the inverse of what the bool is. So then it will be, in this case, if it's not true, then it will run the statement. And what you can also do is like have a second bool, my second bool, and set it equal to true, to false. And what we can have is, so if my first bool is true, and then you can also add different things. So if my we can add functionality that needs multiple things to be true. We can do a double end, and basically what that will mean is if this statement is true and this statement is true, do this statement. So if my bool is true and my second bool is not true, then run the statement. So as you can see, this will now run just fine and see out whatever is specified. So my bool is true. But what we can also do is an OR statement. So OR, so if this is true or that is true. So let's do an OR. An OR is with double, straight lines, whatever they're called. So let's now do my bool is also not true. So if my bool is not true, or my second bool is not true, what you can see is my bool is equal to true. So this would return false if we only had that. But my second bool is false. So that's correct. So if you now run this code, you will see that this console out is called. Like, it called my second bool was true. My bool is true. So that's basically it. We can chain up as many as you want, and we can use we can just chain up as many as we want, and everything will just be fine. So thanks for watching. In the next episode I'm gonna learn you all about functions, so yeah, be ready.